Right, so basically, like Lori was saying, what I want to do tonight is I just want to provide a little bit of an intro to the topic. And then I want to do this, what I've called this self-assessment. So it's that first step in technology planning, right? So I said we're not going to get through, like a full technology plan isn't something you get through in an hour, and it's not something, as you pointed out, that you would necessarily do on your own. It's something that involves, ideally involves more people in your organization if you have more people, unless you're on your own, in which case, yes, it's just you. But I do want people to feel like you have somewhere to go out of this session, that it's not just like a make work project. So I think my goal with the self-assessment is that it will help you to really reflect and understand where you're at in a more structured, meaningful way. But then also we can talk about, at least set for yourself 1 or 2 goals coming out of this, so you can think about where you want to go forward in the next year. And then just talk about it with other people, because it's always good to learn from each other. To me, that's one of the benefits of being able to come out to something like this instead of, say, doing it on a webinar. And so I think thanks for everyone for sharing these kind of things. As I said, I won't be able to get into everything, but even when we do go through the workshop, everyone will have different interpretations, different understandings, different levels of knowledge, different questions about all sorts of topics, and those are totally welcome. And I'm hoping that you can make use of your fellow attendees here and also the other people in the room who can help you out. So certainly anyone from TechSoup Canada, we're used to chatting with people all the time about this kind of stuff, so we're happy to bounce ideas off of, you can bounce ideas off of us and ask any questions you have. And if there are questions that apply to the whole group, then we can answer them as a group. If you have specific areas here and there comes up a time when it comes up, just remind me of it and we can talk about it a little bit more. Those are all good points. So, ready to go? So as I said, I wanted to just give you a little bit of context to start the session off of why do we plan for technology, which some of you obviously already have some idea because you're here. So you've already taken the first step. You actually were brave enough to come to the session that there was technology planning in the title. So give yourself a pat on the back. But more broadly, I think the question to me that I want to answer with this is, how does technology fit into my organization and why is it worth my time? And even if you understand that, doesn't mean you necessarily have that understanding from other people at your organization, and maybe you're looking to gain that. So I wanted to share a pretty simple framework I have for thinking about this. And by I have, I mean I totally stole this off of Jane, who stole it off of someone else. So it's not like, I don't want to pretend that I made this all up. But your organization is like a house, is the basic idea. So what does that mean? So we start off with the roof, which is your mission, right? It's the most important part of your organization. It's the goal of what you're trying to get done. If you're doing anything that's not trying to help your mission, at the end of the day, why are you doing it? So I thought maybe, is there someone brave enough to use their organization as an example for the group, and so we can kind of go through this exercise? Anyone want to volunteer? It's a brave organization here. Otherwise I'll have to use TechSoup and that's lame. Jess? I'll volunteer. Okay, we can use TechSoup. We can do our own tech planning, which goodness knows we probably need to do.
Never met before.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, I didn't want to erase that. That was good stuff. I'm sorry. I hope someone remembers what's there. Okay. So we start off with. Okay, this part kind of sucks. We start off with the roof of our house, which is our mission. So what is our mission, Jess?
To ensure that every nonprofit, charity, and other NGO on the planet knows how to utilize the tech resources available to them to maximize their mission and making those tech resources as available as possible.
Wonderful. So we're going to abbreviate that for the purposes of my little diagram. So to say, I'll actually put what's on the sign up there. Empowering communities. But if you've ever wondered what that actually means, it's what Jess just said. Okay. So, then what comes next? So this is the pillars. These are how you work towards your mission, is through your programs and services, right? So for some of you, that may be providing use computer refurbishment program. For some organizations, that is food bank, like people can come and get food. It doesn't have to do with technology, it can be anything, right? In our case, some of them do have to do with technology. So what are some of our pillars at TechSoup, Jess?
The donations program.
Okay. Let's do 3. Can we come up with 3?
Probably events like Net Tuesday and webcasts and webinars.
Okay. Right, because events are all about teaching people about technology, which leads back to that. And do we have a 3rd one?
I believe Tierney Smith is the person you should talk to about that.
Really? That's my job? Yeah, thanks, Jess. Come on, what kind of good coworker are you that can't name what I do?
I am the customer service job. I know that other stuff is your person.
I'll call it learning resources as a separate pillar here. Okay, so who wants to, so like give me a couple examples from you guys. Like what are some of your programs and services that you do?
Research.
Research, right?
Networking.
Education.
Great, so these are all programs and services that hold up our mission. And so what provides the foundation of all of this house is our administration stuff. So without me telling you guys what this is, what do you think might be in this category?
Bookkeeping, accounting, finance, marketing, outreach.
Yeah, so we just note down a couple of those. So finance and accounting. You said marketing?
Yeah, human resources.
Yeah, HR. Sorry, I'm just going to list them because I don't want to make all many boxes. Who else said stuff or said somewhere else?
What about technology?
Yes.
Good.
What else? What's one of our key ones that every single nonprofit except for TechSoup Canada has to deal with?
Fundraising.
Fundraising. Fundraising. So you guys were good. Fundraising, there's sometimes confusion that fundraising is a pillar. Fundraising is not a pillar. It's not a program, right? It's one of the foundation things here. Sorry, other people said things that I didn't catch. Because it was all
Volunteer management.
volunteer, yeah. Volunteers, volunteer management. Okay, I think I skipped a few letters. Okay, so we get the idea, right? So these are all the foundation of your house. So that's the big picture, right? We've got mission on the top, programs and services, administrative services. And the reason I like this, I mean, it seems like a simple analogy, but for me it helps remind me what the place of technology is in the house, right? Like it's not a pillar, it's not, but it's not like this thing off to the side like a garden gnome that, like it is part of the foundation. I gave it an extra special box, and we need to treat it that way. So I was sharing this example with Lori, and she actually had a great analogy. She said, you know, it's kind of like Jenga. Our technology foundation is kind of like Jenga. So this is what, has anyone played Jenga before? Okay, so if you haven't played Jenga, it basically looks like this. There's a stack of blocks. There's like 3 blocks each way, and they're stacked crossways from each other on this nice path. And the object of the game is that you push some of these blocks out and create holes, and you're trying to push as many blocks out as you can without the tower falling down. So of course we want our technology foundation to be a stable foundation. We want, I don't know, who wouldn't want like all the bells and whistles, some like great massive IT department that can look after everything for us and keep everything running and everything works smoothly and perfectly. But we all know that that's not the reality in a nonprofit. This is maybe more what the reality looks like. So, and the thing is, I mean, this is perfectly reasonable, right, in a way, because if we think about it, we're all nonprofits, we're all dealing with really limited resources, and especially for those of us that are run on donor resources, we have to be extra careful in managing and stewarding those resources that we're given, right? So, of course, you know, we're not going to necessarily get the latest souped up everything. Of course, we're going to, you know, make sacrifices in certain areas, make do with what we can. So, you know, some of this might be, okay, we have a part-time IT person, or we don't upgrade, or we don't have the fanciest, latest database, but it works pretty well and it's all good. And so part of my point is I want to say that's okay. I mean, we're not all going to have the newest fancy stuff. That's the reality, right? Like, I don't think we can go into a technology planning exercise expecting to have, you know, the same state-of-the-art software IT infrastructure that a large bank does, right? That's just not really necessarily realistic for us. But the question is, when does all of this cutting corners lead to this? So what is that, how can we make that balancing act between making sure that we are using our financial resources properly and our human resources and all of our other resources, and when are we just cutting too many corners and really weakening our foundation? Because the thing is, when this happens, if this is the foundation of your house, then the whole house suffers, right? Your programs and services suffer, and ultimately your mission suffers, depending on how badly your little pile of Jenga blocks fall over. So that's the overall picture I want to paint for you going into this, is remembering that this is at the foundation, and you want to look at your foundation and make sure that it's supporting what you're doing. So, I even created the slide for this. So having said this, that's all very nice. What I'm hoping that you'll be able to get out of tonight is not just this nice fuzzy, like, yes, I know I should do all this stuff, but actually, how can we get more concrete? How can we actually move forward and try to make some of this a reality in our organizations? How can we play that balancing act in an informed way instead of just in a random way, because we don't really, you know, we might not know a lot about technology depending on your background. You may have been thrust in a role where you have to make technology decisions. That happens all the time, and it's totally fair. So, now I want to get into the self-assessment, which is on all of your tables. So if you haven't already grabbed a copy, grab one now. And I was originally going to make it short and just tell you to go through it, and it ended up being a little bit longer, so we could actually make it useful for you guys. So we're going to walk through it section by section, and I know some of you have taken a look at it already. But basically what I've done, so does everybody have one? Because we have some extra copies of something. So basically what I've done is I've broken it down into 4 sections. So the sections are basics, day-to-day, strategy, and innovation. So my goal is that no matter where you are with your technology, there's always something to improve, right? Just because you've got your basic stuff all working, there's still room to grow, and if you don't have your basic stuff working, then you can focus differently. So my goal is that there's something here for everyone, that you can look at it from a broad picture and think about this. So we're going to start off with the basics. Seems like a good place to start. So have a look. So basically, I'm just going to briefly explain what the intent of the section is, and then I'll give you a few minutes to think about it and fill it out, and just circle where you're at, and then we can come back and we'll move on to the next section. And this is where, if you have questions, this is the part where I want you to be asking them, right? I want you to be, if stuff in the handout, in the worksheet doesn't make sense, I want you to be letting us know. I want you to be calling on the different people and making sure you're thinking through this in a useful way for you. Yes?
Just wanted to ask, so we're going to circle and mess this up. Is this going to be available on,
Yes.
we can print this off today?
Yes. So, and I mean, ultimately the end goal with all of this is that if you do find it helpful, you can do it again.
Okay.
On a regular, semi-regular basis, because as you evolve, then you need to reassess where you are. So yes, I will make this available after the event.
Thank you.
So getting started, the basics. So this is like the foundation of your foundation. This is where some people refer to, think of technology, okay, it's like electricity. It's like a basic thing, you just need it to keep it running. If the technology, or if the electricity in your building is cut, the whole thing, like, you can't work, you're in the dark, right? Like, that's kind of how it is with the basics. If this stuff stops working, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time scrambling around trying to fix it. On the other hand, it usually works most of the time, if you're lucky. So sometimes we don't take the time to think about it, and it's not necessarily the most sexy area to think about. But just as a recent example, I hope this hasn't happened to any of you, but we were working with one particular nonprofit, and they're large enough, I think about maybe 40 to 50 staff. and they have a couple of different servers at some different locations, and we were chatting to them about some completely unrelated stuff, like we were working more on step 2, the day-to-day stuff with them. And then we realized that they actually didn't have some of the basic stuff down. They were having some struggles here, and in particular they were struggling with backup, and they said to us, you know, we're a little worried about one of our servers. We had an IT person, but then they left at the end of the summer, and we're not really sure, like we didn't really replace them, so we're kind of doing it in-house, but no one really knows what's going on, and can you come take a look at it? So we're like, okay, we'll come next week, we'll come take a look at it, don't worry, we'll get this sorted out for you. And before we were gonna come in, we got a call from them, and they were like, yeah, so one of the servers, it died already, and we found out we didn't have a backup of it. Our last backup was a year old, so basically half of their office, one of their locations, lost all of their files, no backup. It was just like the worst possible scenario. We were all crying and cringing and really upset with them. And at that point, once you lose it, what do you do, right? Like, how do you recover a year's worth of your staff's hard work? So again, I mean, I don't like to say this in a scary way, but this stuff, it is basic. It has to keep running, and if it does fail, then it can lose you a lot of time, like we saw in that organization's case. It's really painful. So, but it looks like different things, right? It vary depending on what kind of software, you know, if you have cloud, this might look, cloud programs or hosted online programs, this might look very different than if you have a server. So that's where if you have questions about how does this apply to me, feel free to ask us. So I'm giving you a couple minutes to do that now. And as I said, ask if you have any questions. Okay, so maybe I'll just say something briefly. Just had a great question here about how does backup apply when you're online in the cloud, and do you own your data? So I think you know if you have your own server, you have to back it up. That's pretty standard. If you have stuff in the cloud, just wanted to make a brief comment. If anyone wants to talk about it, ask about it further, go ahead. Basically, the standard is, in one sense, it's backed up for you automatically. So because of the fact that you gave your data to that company, it's kind of their responsibility as a data provider or as a service provider to make sure that they don't lose your data. So they've got it replicated in a whole bunch of different locations, and you will never even notice. Like it looks seamless to you. All you know is that you don't lose your data. So that's kind of one of the nice things about the cloud, is that backup magically happens without you thinking about it. On the flip side of that, though, is what happens if you decide to leave the service, or the service shuts down for whatever reason, or anything like that. Can you get your data back out of the cloud? Can you still access it? So it is kind of a backup issue, because it's all very well that they've got your data safe and secure, but if you don't want to use them, then you still don't have your data, right? So one of the things that I do recommend when people go to cloud services is to look at can you get your data back out? Like ask, depending on the type of service it is, it may be something where you can export your data if you wanted to later move to another service, something like that. Or some cloud services, so say something like Dropbox. Do people kind of know what Dropbox is?
Yes.
So it's because it's a folder on your computer, right, that has your files in it and it's synced with online. You implicitly have a copy on your computer, right? So if for some reason you decided to stop using Dropbox, all the files are still on your computer. But if you decided to stop using Facebook, for example, there's really no way to export that data. They haven't made it possible. It would probably be very complex because it's like a whole bunch of interactions with different people. So that's kind of like two extremes of being able to get data out of the cloud. So that's what I would say for backup. If you are in the cloud, those are kind of the two factors to think about. Is on the one hand, good for you because your data is already backed up and you don't have to worry about it. On the other hand, can you get it back out if you need it to?
I have a question, and maybe just add to that. If you use things like a wiki, so PBWorks wiki, right?
Yep.
And if you use the free version of PBWorks wiki, they don't back that up for you. The free version,
Okay.
you have to pay. And if you want to export it, you have to pay, right? So you can export it and then pay to put it into wherever you're exporting it to. So it's important in adult literacy where we work, where people don't have a lot of money, they use a lot of the free versions, the free first level of something, not realizing that it's not backing up. So wikis are really important because people put a lot of data on the wiki.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. So sometimes with the free versions that it is a hosted program, you can't assume that it's being backed.
That's
It's
right.
worth checking that.
Yeah.
I think that goes to the next one, actually, to policies too,
Mhm.
that even very small organizations think they don't need to think through that stuff, but they do.
Mhm.
Under what conditions will we use free? And do we understand the difference between free and pro? And what is our process for making that decision? You know,
Mhm.
because we've run across that with the programs we support.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge because of course you want to use the free version, but you're right, even a small organization, if you lose all your data, you still lost all your data, right?
So I'm intrigued by the policies idea, because I mean, we use a lot, in my organization, we use a lot of technologies, and then I got to the policies part and I thought, what is a technology
That's a
policy?
good question.
So, what is technology policy?
So, I'll first ask the group, does anyone have ideas? So we had one idea already around, do we have a policy around checking certain criteria around the services? When we're picking services, do we have certain criteria? Does anyone have other ideas of policies that they have in their organizations or they've seen somewhere?
Privacy
Privacy policies?
and what does technology make available beyond the borders of your organization?
Mhm.
Emails or whatever.
And could those be inside your organization as well, in terms of?
Yeah, so certainly one is user rules and responsibilities, which I think plays into privacy. So is there some data that only certain people can access? For example, if you have a database, can everyone delete a record? Can everyone edit a record? Can everyone see all the records? So all the stuff around that. And then, right, can you share with people outside the organization? That's an excellent one.
Some large organizations approach technology policy from a governance perspective. They have like that kind of specialization of governance.
Give some examples.
We don't have it in our organization. I'm just aware of it, like that. Some large organizations take it to the extreme of placing at the governance level.
We have policies about how you conduct yourself online.
Okay. So like a social media policy kind of thing? So, or like how do you...
Offensive material and
Right.
civil conduct.
Right, so if the staff are, do you one that covers also in their personal lives? Like if they're using social media or like online and talking about the organization? Or if they're at work and they're talking about the organization, how should they act? How should they represent themselves?
People who are subscribing to the website and taking
Oh,
part
okay.
in the blog.
Okay, so if you have an online community kind of thing, what comments are acceptable, what's not. Yeah, excellent.
Who's responsible for what? That basically if something breaks or you need something changed or you need to find out about something, who's the person that is supposed to deal with this?
Yeah, so responsibilities, especially around technology. So I've seen this in another organization I'm working with now. Someone's computer broke and they do have an IT person, but it's a contractor. And so they said, who do I go to tell them my computer broke? I need a new computer. And then they found out, what are our policies around what kind of computer we buy? There was no policy around that. Or another one I've seen is when we have an old computer and, or like a staff person leaves and then a new staff person comes, how do we transition that computer to them? What do we do with the old data? Any other examples?
Yeah, this has come up for me in our organization recently. So as a staff person, what social media, how do I belong to things? So do I have to have a personal Facebook account and do I use that for work? Do I have to have a work Facebook account and is it mine or is it shared or is it like how does that all work?
Right.
What voice, when I'm talking, what voice am I using or what account?
Right, are you speaking on behalf of the organization or on behalf of yourself?
And what
How
if
do
I
you
don't,
clarify
for me,
that?
it's like, what if I don't want to have a Facebook account?
Mhm.
So then, and I'm expected to use Facebook at work.
Right,
What account am I using, right?
right, especially for Facebook, 'cause it's based around your personal,
Twitter,
you kind of have to have a
all
personal,
those
can't
things,
use it.
yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Yeah.
I would say that policy can be a double-edged sword. People that construct policy from a very rigid controlling mindset actually cause a disservice. It can demotivate people. and inhibit newer technologies from being integrated into our organization. I've seen it happen many times.
So
And
that's-
now that we have like a young generation
Yeah.
that's very technology savvy, they really react against this and won't even maybe work for you if that's the way you're going to behave.
So it's an excellent point to have in this policy. I think it's a good way to wrap it up. Is that you're completely on the ball. Policy is a double-edged sword, right? So the reason I put it on this list in part is because sometimes what my experience so far has been with a small slice of nonprofits that I've worked with is that there's basically no policies. And that does end up tripping you up because these questions come up. Like often when you run into these policy issues, when things come up, right? You're like, how does our organization do this? Don't we want to kind of standardize the way we do this? And you don't really have an answer, and that's when you need to create a policy around it. But you're completely right that sometimes older policies, just like processes, if you have them for a long time, you don't really question why you have them. It becomes ingrained, and then it starts to cause problems because the motivation behind creating it has gone away, right? And then it just becomes a barrier. You're like, maybe you had this process to go to fix certain problems, and it made sense in the context of when you created it. Things change, your organization grows, but your policy remains the same. You have to go talk to 20 different people to change one little thing. It's going to drive people crazy, right? So I think it's a really good point to make with policy. You want to have it to help you structure the way you do things and standardize in some respects, but you can definitely go too far with it. And you have to be watchful for that too. So has everyone had time to complete the first part, or does anyone want more time to reflect on that? And we've had some discussion around it. I'm going to take it that everyone's good. Okay, awesome. And as I said, we'll have time to kind of share a little bit more of your personal experience with the group at the end. So next part I want you to go to is the section on day-to-day technologies. And so this is what I consider along with the basic session, this is probably, if you talk to an IT person, which some of you might be, this is the part that they would think of as being technology, these first two sections. They would think of this as their responsibility. So this is what actually helps you to run as an organization. This is your email, your website, your database, all of these things that help you do your day-to-day work that at this day and age are pretty much essential. And you may be more or less advanced in different areas. You may have very advanced, fancy fundraising software. If that's your need, you may have something very simple and just keep your donors. I hope you don't keep your donors in an Excel spreadsheet, at least not with their credit card information. But you may have something very simple. Say you only have 5 volunteers, you're not going to have a volunteer management system for them, right? So your needs are going to vary greatly depending on what you have, and this covers all sorts of different types of areas too. You might have used Word and Office, Excel and stuff like that to do day-to-day work, but you might also use programs online, like maybe use Twitter, social media platforms, maybe use a mass email program like Vertical Response or Constant Contact. Databases kind of falls under here, and it also covers things like your files. This isn't even necessarily, people don't always think this is a technology thing. Maybe you have a shared place for storing your files, and how well are they organized, right? Like, it's not a technology problem, but it's a process problem that can help you from working effectively. So what I want you to think of is not only what are the different things that you have in each of the areas I've listed on this sheet, but I want you to think of what are your challenges in this area. And when you're rating yourself, I didn't put descriptions and stuff because I think it's kind of different for every organization what they would consider a 5 or a 1. What I want you to think about more is for yourself, for the size of organization you are, is the technology you have meeting your needs. So say if you have a very simple email program, but it meets all your needs, you can access it wherever you want, you never have problems with it, then you're good to go, right? It's working fine for you. That's great. You don't need to improve. The problem is when it's something that's slowing you down. Maybe it's even on such a day-to-day basis that you don't even notice it anymore. As I said, back to the file sharing example, if it takes you 10 minutes every time you want to find a document because your files are organized so badly, then your file sharing system is slowing you down. If your way of reviewing documents and emailing a document between multiple people causes different versions and someone has to merge all of them, then that's slowing you down. So think about where are the areas that are really holding you back and where you can improve there. And as always, if you have any questions, share them with me. I don't know what that means. So the next section, I can tell you what it is. This is where we get into, I think, some of the really important stuff that you may or may not, depending on your perspective, think of as being important in technology planning. So the next section is I've called strategy. And what this is about, it's not about specific technologies that you have, it's about how is technology viewed in your organization and how is it treated as a result. So you can be doing all the basics really well, you can be doing the day-to-day stuff all really well. I don't think any of you guys are probably large enough to have a dedicated IT staff, but say you did, you could be running as the smoothest ship in the world, but if your leadership doesn't buy into the idea of technology as an enabler for your organization, if they see it as more of like a garden gnome than as one of the foundation blocks for your programs and services, then you're not going to use technology to the same potential that you could be. So the way you view technology works into a lot of things, right? It works into, you'll see one of the areas along there is how is it treated in strategic planning. So when the organization, say, wants to launch a new program, how do they view technology? So I'll give you an example. So maybe the goal is to, we want to increase the number of volunteers that we have. So do you just go say to your volunteer manager, go do this, or do we say at a high level, okay, how are we going to actually accomplish this goal? And while we're having that conversation, let's talk about what technology is needed to support us, because it's integrated, it's super intertwined, right? If we just said to our IT person, go get me a volunteer management software, that's kind of scary. Like you don't want to know what you're going to get back. But if you actually think about it in an integrated way when you're setting goals, then you can actually make good decisions around technology, and your technology will directly support you in your work. So, and then this also relates to the funding question that was brought up earlier, is that you'll see, so this framework, part of the framework that I use, and it's in particular in this section, is from a book that I'll recommend at the end. It's called Managing IT to Meet Your Mission. It's specifically meant for nonprofits. And so they've broken it into different areas, and so they've actually provided in their section on funding some funding guidelines for what percentage of your budget that they recommend you allocate to technology. This is something, I'm assuming it's a good recommendation because it's from this book. I haven't actually tested that myself, so I can't say to you that this is the gospel or not, but this might be a good guideline to help you think about it. But I think the point that they make in this book is even the idea of whether technology is called out as a line item in your budget makes a difference, right? Or whether it's seen like, oh, we don't have a budget for technology, that's not something we spend money on, why are you asking me to spend money on this thing, it's not important. Instead of seeing it as, actually, this isn't just some extra thing, this is what helps us to do our program. It's totally tied in and integrated. This sheet explains it really well. So take a minute, have a look, and see where you fit in the spectrum. So the last section I wanted to highlight on your sheet it's a kind of a nebulous one, but I think it's really important to include. And to me, talking about technology planning wouldn't really be complete without it. And that's innovation. So that's where everything explodes and there's the big cloud of possibilities. Technology, of all these things, technology is changing so fast, right? And it can be hard to keep up with, but it can also be a huge opportunity. So I've kind of broken it down to two different areas where there's an opportunity here. In the way you run as an organization, the way you operate, and in the way you deliver your services, so these programs and services. So let me give you a couple of examples to tell you what I mean. So when it comes to transforming your organization, who here has heard of Beth Kanter or read The Network Nonprofit? Anyone? Okay. So basically what Beth Kanter in this book, which I highly, highly recommend, I'm working my way through it right now, what she's talking about is how the advent of social media is not just about is this cool tool we can play with. It's actually changing the way we work as an organization and the way we're expected to work. So our supporters, especially younger supporters like myself, for example, in the Millennium generation, are looking to nonprofits, not looking for an organization to be faithful donors and to give you $100 now until we die. That's not the kind of relationships we have with organizations anymore. We're looking for organizations that really match our values. We might move around depending on different campaigns, really influenced by what our friends are doing. We're really interested in seeing transparency and openness in nonprofits, so we want to be able to have a dialogue. If we want to know where our money is going, and if some crisis happens, we want to know what the nonprofit thinks about it. We don't want them to shut up, to just close off and not talk to us. We want to be able to have an idea of who works there and have this interaction with them. We may want to just do stuff on our own. Ultimately, we care about the cause. We don't care about the organization. So we might run our own fundraising event. We might just go ahead on our own raising awareness about a certain cause and maybe mention some organizations. We might even actually start to provide some basic services on our own. So the way that the world is changing, the new generations, technology, all of this is changing the way that nonprofits operate, or the way that nonprofits can operate. So it's a greater opportunity to engage with our stakeholders and to engage with our supporters, our donors, our volunteers in more interactive ways, not like just give us money. It's like we can really tell you what's going on, we can share our story in different ways, we can get you involved in our work at a whole different level than was possible before. And we can also change the way that we work with other organizations. So if we see ourselves in the old way, we see ourselves as this fortress that like, I am going to conquer cancer. Like that is what my organization does. And if you're trying to conquer cancer too, then you're a competitor. I want to conquer cancer first. I want more money. I want more researchers, whatever that is. And instead, we can see other organizations more as collaborators, right? Because there's no organization on the planet that has a monopoly on solving social issues, right? There's no one of us that can do it on our own. So these are bigger trends that are happening in the sector, and technology can be a part of that. The kind of tools that are available in the cloud for collaboration, for example, can be hugely empowering to different organizations working together or for communicating with their supporters, right? So social media has been so powerful because it's enabled us to be really open and transparent with our supporters. Even simple tools like Dropbox and Google Docs, I found, have been incredibly powerful, even in our own work at TechSoup, for collaborating with other organizations. Just being able to see the same copy of the document, agree on what page we're at, edit it at the same time, like live in real time, that totally transforms the way you work with other organizations. So that's what I mean by transforming your organization. And there's no limits on what this can encompass. Again, that's why it's innovation. That's why there's not like a 1 to 5 ranking. Am I innovative? I'm 5. Yes. There's a world of possibilities here, but that's what I mean by the first one. Transforming service delivery is a little bit different. So I think of that's how we actually carry out these services. The way we carry out the services can change, and we might even add new services that are taking advantage of the tech trends. So example of changing services or doing them in a more efficient way. I posted a blog recently that was from a guy who works at one of the Pathways to Education offices or locations, and they work with young people in high priority neighborhoods to help them graduate. And so they were having the challenge that every time some detail of an event changed, they would have to phone up each of the youth in their program and tell them about the change. And that was incredibly time consuming because they would have to usually call the people, but it's not a matter of just calling them, telling them to change and hanging up. They'd usually call, maybe reach a parent or sibling, wait for a while on hold while they're trying to Sally, get down here, wait for the youth to come to the phone, or maybe you have to take a message. Then finally I could get to talk to the person and hang up. And then you try to do that with 30 different youth, it takes a long time, right? So they talked to the youth and they said, how do you communicate best? And the youth said, well, Facebook, texting. We're like, well, do you communicate by email? We have an email account, but not really. Sometimes, universities or schools send us information to our email account. I check it, once every 2 weeks. Don't let me know by email. I'll come, I won't know about the change in your event. That's not a good way to communicate with them. So they realized that, okay, if you're on Facebook, if you're texting, if that's how we communicate with each other, and that's how you'd like to be reached, then how can we change the way we work to accommodate that? And in the end, they were able to save their staff hours and hours of time, like I think thousands of hours a year, just by making this change and adopting the new technologies to improve the way they were delivering services. Another example is technology might even enable you to add new services. So there's an organization in England, and I'm sure there's many others that are doing this, that provide counseling. So you're in a tough situation, you are possibly at risk of committing suicide or something like that. And they had a helpline, and you could even contact them by email to reach out in that time of crisis. But they are also able to add a new program for counseling via text, which is like a whole new area, and they had to work out the kinks of how does that work. But they found that people really responded to it, and some people, that was their preferred method of communication. And so because they were able to add that extra program, they were able to fulfill their mission better and save more people's lives through that way. So for you, this is like how you work, how you engage your supporters, how you collaborate, but also think about how you run your programs and services. How are new technologies and tech trends in technology like mobile and gaming, and we talked about this a couple of months ago at our Net Tuesday, how are that changing how you run your programs, or are there even opportunities for new types of programs, new ways of achieving your mission that weren't possible before? So just take a few minutes to think about that, and that's probably a good point for discussion as well. So I know we're covering a huge amount of ground in a really short time here. So again, I'm hoping that, I know you won't get it all done tonight, but I'm hoping that at least this will sort of spark some conversations that you can take back to your organization and think more deeply. Like every single area on this sheet is something worthy of its own, its own hour and a half or 2 hours at the very least of discussion and planning. So just want to say that for what it's worth. So I just want to take a minute to bring it all together, and then we can have a little bit more discussion, as I keep promising. So if it's meaningful for you, you might just have an idea of how you're doing, but if it is meaningful, you can kind of count up how you're doing in each area and get a feel for, okay, am I totally chaotic in the basics, but I'm doing really well on day to day, or I'm overall doing well in certain areas, but our database is just a nightmare, we don't even have one, or it's in access and it was built in the last century. Whatever it is, basically we're getting, get a feel for where you're at overall in this big picture, right? Like, are there certain areas where you're doing better than others? Where parts do you need to focus on? And think about, so as a nonprofit, right? Like we can't, as anyone, any organization, even if you were in a nonprofit, you can't do everything at once, right? But especially as a nonprofit, what I don't want for you to come out of this event feeling is just completely overwhelmed. Like, great, Tierney told me all the areas where we suck. Yay! That's not how I want you to feel at the end of the event. It can be overwhelming to actually think this all through in the big picture. But I want you to take this approach of prioritizing your needs so that it doesn't just overwhelm you, it doesn't become a stumbling block, but actually becomes a way to move forward. So what I'm suggesting is be realistic and pick 2 areas to focus on. One that you'll work on in the next 3 to 6 months, so a more short-term objective, and a bit of a longer one. So when you want to work on over the next year, this is something as an organization we want to accomplish. And start off, the different sections of your sheet are in an order for a reason, right? So like I said, with basics, not super sexy, but they are really essential. So if you know that, you don't have to tell me, but if you know that none of your data is backed up, then that's something you want to keep in your head to be able to go back. It's probably something you want to focus on in the short term, so you want to make that your short-term goal. But maybe a longer-term goal is getting a new database, or maybe upgrading to a new email system that lets you access it from home, or something like that. Whatever it is for you, pick 2 areas. And if you're having trouble prioritizing, I recommend this way of thinking about it. So think about the cost versus the impact. So I didn't include this in your form, but you can draw it out if you want, and think about, okay, if there's so many different things to do, what's really going to have the most impact for us? I mean, ideal is high impact and low cost, right? But we can't always get that. So what's maybe high impact with a reasonable level of cost? Or it's so high impact that it's worth really investing in. So that can be a helpful framework for you to think about. So basically what I want you to do is come up with a couple of things, and then this is where, and so if you guys, are you guys from the same organization? Yeah. So you might want to go to different tables so you can chat with other people. And just kind of go around the table and, I mean, you may have not done the whole assessment tonight, but share just one or two highlights from what you've thought about, what you've gotten out of doing this process. Is there anything that surprised you? So you're like, well, I never really thought about this aspect of stuff, but actually this is an area we're doing really well, or this is an area we really need to work on, and I never thought about it that way before. And then what are you thinking of doing going forward? So, and then that's the session. So, actually, so before I'm going to let you loose doing that, I just do want to mention a couple of other things. So what happens after this, right? Obviously, this is just the start. So you want to think about other things like what time are we going to do this in, how much is it going to cost us, making the budget, learning about what different tools are out there. So as an example, I put a handout on each table, and just to be able to flip through as an example of like, okay, what are some of the different tools that are available in different areas? But we do have some more resources about this online. You know, find out what resources you have to help you. Do you have people in-house who are savvy enough to help you out, or do you need to get someone external? And as I mentioned before, lather, rinse, and repeat. So this isn't a one-time thing. This is something that you do on an ongoing basis as you evolve and grow, and as your strategy changes, then your technology changes.
I've got one question about what you just raised there.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of cost, is that just dollars, or is it in terms of dollars and also the time that people need to spend?
So it's an excellent point, is that there's two types of cost, right? There's cost in terms of money, and there's cost in terms of time. And depending on your organization, you may have more of one or the other, right? So it's kind of a balancing act of knowing your own organization. If nobody on your staff knows anything about technology and you're trying to, you've decided you want to set up a server, then you probably don't want to try to do it yourself. You could, but you probably wouldn't do a very good job, and it would take you a long, long time, and like a lot of, like keep in mind that your time is money in a way too, right? Like the time that you spend doing stuff is time that you can't spend doing other things. So it may be worth getting someone in, or getting tech-savvy volunteers to come help you out. On the other hand, yes, if you're actually paying someone, then that's that painful cash outlay. But do keep in mind, it's a really good point. I think people do forget that their own time is valuable money. It's not just the time that they're paying to people. You know, you may or may not be paid at your organization, but your time is important. So, you know, do know when to go get outside help. Sometimes it's more efficient to do so. I just wanted to share a few resources that we offer if you want to learn more about this. One of the things that someone mentioned at the beginning that I want to call out here is one of the articles in our Learning Center under Tech Planning Resources is actually specifically about doing a tech inventory, and it has a whole bunch of templates for like inventorying servers, computers, software, keys, like writing down all those nitty-gritty details. So check that out. That has a whole bunch of templates. I didn't write it, but it's really good. And if you're looking for just learning more about tools, these are a couple of resources that I recommend. If you're at the stage, we know what we want to do. Always ask first, what are we trying to accomplish here? And then ask what tool can help me do this, and there's some resources to help you. And these are the two books that I mentioned before. Really good reads if you want to learn more about this topic.